What is going on, everybody? It's your boy John, and welcome back to Gearbox. So today we've got a different type of topic that we typically don't talk about on this channel. Now, with that being said, right now I am pursuing my instrument license. Now, I'm not going to get into the differences in private license versus your instrument license add-on or any of that sort of stuff, but what I want to talk about today are some of the hardest things about actually getting your instrument license. And if you, watching this video right now, are either considering getting your instrument ticket, or maybe you are in the middle of training or whatever, this is going to be the video for you. So without further ado, we're going to start the top 5 list with number 1 in no particular order, but let's get right into it. For the first entry on this list, we are talking about knowing and understanding the different types of approaches. And those approaches are precision, approaches with vertical guidance, and non-precision approaches. Now, of course, those are pretty vague terms there, but you might hear an ILS, or you might hear a VOR DME arc, or an RNAV, or an LPV, or a LNAV, or whatever. There's a ton of them, and it's kind of overwhelming when you start getting into it. Understanding what sort of approach are we doing, how exactly are we tracking, that course, whether that be GPS, waypoints or VOR frequencies, and what differentiates them. Which approaches have a decision height, which approaches have a minimum decision altitude. All of these sorts of things where, ultimately when you're working up to your written exam and your oral exam and your check ride, these are all things that you have to not only know, but be able to articulate. And in my experience, I don't have an issue flying any of these things. However, when I start taking written practice tests, or I start trying to articulate these approaches to my instructor and how they differ in certain ways, it's difficult. But it is super, super important to understand, not only from you fly here and you fly there and you tune this and you do that, but also from a written perspective, being able to give the textbook definition of what this type of approach is versus what this approach is. So definitely a good entry for number 1. Now let's get on to number 2. For the second entry on this list, I want to talk about holding patterns and procedure turns. Now, the concept, and just hearing the term holding pattern, for example, is pretty simple. And it's a very familiar concept. There needs to be more separation in the airspace for one reason or another, so we need to enter a holding pattern to create that separation. Now, although that part is easy, the hardest part, in my opinion, is learning what holding entries are appropriate given the radial that you're holding on and your direction of flight, i.e. the heading that you are approaching that vortex, let's call it, and to be able to think on the fly and understand why you are either going to choose a direct entry, a teardrop entry, or a parallel entry. Now, I went ahead and, in my typical Picasso form, I went ahead and drew this up. And this is really going to be your best friend when it comes to learning these things. So the circle in the middle here, there's a big circle, that's your compass for all intents and purposes. This circle, or oval, is going to be your holding pattern. And then the lines here are different sectors of your holding entry based on where you are entering that sector based on your heading. And I know that sounds like a jumbled up mess, but do this if you want to. I'm sure I'm not the first person to do it, but I was struggling so much with understanding the difference between teardrop, parallel, and direct entries that I went online and Googled IFR, holding entries or whatever, and they gave me a nice color-coded picture, and I put it as my background on my phone until I could not forget it. In my experience, it's not difficult to understand while flying. When you're flying and you have ForeFlight up and you are very aware of the situation and where you are in time and space as it relates to the VOR, it's not difficult. But once again, back to the IFR written practice tests, when you get a question that says, ATC has cleared you for a hold on the 15 DME 090 radial at XYZ VOR, your heading is 270. What is the appropriate hold entry? And what sucks is that sometimes it's more than one answer. Being able to paint that picture in your head is extremely difficult for me, but unfortunately that's really the only way to do it, and it is worth practicing. Practice all of those questions. Drill it into your head, because I swear to God, it is going to help you in the long run. But that is the second entry, holds and procedure turns. And now let's get on to number 3. For the third entry on this list, we are talking about air traffic control. Yes, for my private pilot people, whether you're a student or licensed, who grew up or learned to fly at an uncontrolled airport like me, you know that talking to air traffic control is nerve-wracking. Even going to a towered airport is nerve-wracking sometimes. But being on an IFR flight plan, you have to talk to air traffic control. And not only do you have to talk to them, but you have to talk to them in a certain way to convey what you're doing, where you're going, what your intentions are, and be as clear and concise as possible while you're on with Delta Flight 4792 or Learjet so-and-so, Gulfstream so-and-so. And it is terrifying. It really is. Get comfortable with these position calls, or get comfortable with how air traffic control is going to relay information to you. For example, Cessna 5 Foxtrot November, making something up. Cessna 5 Foxtrot November, you are 10 miles out from Riggy, cross Riggy at or above 5,000 feet, clear for the ILS-1 into blank airport. Read it back. Cross Riggy at or above 5,000 feet, clear for the ILS-1 into whatever. It doesn't seem complicated when I'm sitting here talking like this, just talking to a camera. But when everyone on frequency can hear you, and when you've got a million other things going on, you're trying to brief the plate, you're trying to make sure you're staying on heading, make sure your airspeed's good, understand how quickly do I need to descend to be at that 5,000 foot altitude in order to set myself up for success for this ILS approach, tuning in the VOR frequency, identifying the VOR frequency. There's so much that goes on inside the airplane when you're getting to go time for an approach that air traffic control does not exactly make it any easier. But two things. One, if you can stay ahead of the plane as much as you possibly can, and yes, I know that is not a new concept, whether we're talking IFR flying, VFR flying, whatever, stay ahead of the airplane. And number two is get an understanding and be able to not make assumptions, but give a pretty good estimated guess on what air traffic control is going to do and how they're going to say that, and recite it in your head. Getting comfortable with the phraseology and being able to just rattle it off and listen, repeat, all of that sort of stuff is extremely important. So get comfortable with it, because I promise you it's not going away anytime soon. For the number 4 entry on this list, we're going to talk about getting comfortable flying in less than ideal weather conditions. And what I mean by that is, through our VFR private pilot training, odds are we're going up on days where there's 10-mile visibility, when cloud ceilings are at 9,000 feet, when the max crosswind you have is maybe 5 knots. And it is the most ideal weather conditions to fly an airplane. But when you're going to get your VFR ticket, guess what, guys? The entire reason behind having an instrument rating is being able to fly in less than VFR weather. and it takes some getting used to. Now, disclaimer here, this does not in any way, shape, or form mean disregard the personal minimums that you've set for yourself, and put yourself in a situation that makes you feel uncomfortable or in danger in any way. That's not what I'm saying here. But what I am saying is, when you're flying in actual instrument conditions, 9 times out of 10, especially with your instructor is not going to allow you to go on a flight if it puts anyone at risk, including himself, myself, whoever. That's really how you start building your confidence and your personal minimums that might have, been a thing in your private pilot license world, but now you need to start building your instrument minimums. And anyway, I could talk for days on that topic, but that is something you're going to have to get used to in order to really put your instrument ticket through its paces. So once again, don't just completely disregard personal minimums or anything, but just know instrument weather is not nice, happy VFR weather. For the 5th and final entry on this list, we are going to talk about something that really applies to any and all things in life, and that is consistency. While getting your instrument license, arguably more so than really anything else, consistency is key. There's always the whole concept of legal recency experience versus an actual proficient pilot. Yeah, sure, you might have your recency stuff knocked out, but are you actually proficient in flying approaches, in tracking VORs, in entering holding patterns, and doing this and doing that? It's all things where basically if you don't use it, you lose it type of deal. And through training, it is super, super important to continue to stack good, successful flights and ground lessons on top of each other. So if you're going to go get your instrument ticket and you say, oh, I'm going to fly once a month, in my opinion, don't do it. Wait until you have enough time to be able to dedicate, ideally, at least 1 flight a week, if not 2 or maybe even 3 a week, to where you can just start. It becomes second nature, and you're not thinking as much as you're just doing. And that's kind of where I'm at. Right now, my minimum flight schedule is once a week. I try to get out 2 times a week. I'm about to take a couple days off of work and fly 3 consecutive days in a row and really, really nail it down. But if you can't be consistent and you can't apply what you did in your last flight and be like, oh yeah, remember that one big point that we talked about on the last flight, and apply it to this flight, you're not going to progress nearly as fast, if at all, in some cases. And that is one of the biggest things. And once again, that applies to anything. Guitar, same thing. You can play and you can learn the basics and you can get around, but if you're not playing every day, you're never going to be Jimi Hendrix, okay? There's levels to it. And so you have to be consistent, you have to be diligent in your training and your studying and whatever in order to be a good, safe instrument pilot, and that's what it's all about. So we're going to go ahead and end it right there. Once again, I could talk about this topic for literal days. It is a passion of mine, and it's top of mind right now being in instrument training. So with that being said, if you like this video, give it a big fat thumbs up. If you are in instrument training, if you are thinking about getting your instrument ticket and you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever, drop them in the comment section down below. I would love to have conversations with each and every one of you. And as always, guys, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. You know the drill. And until next time, peace. 是留在自己那张脏乱的床，手摆好姿态对我